today on Online for Authors, I'm chatting with D.R. Shores, author of Shallow Stock. Welcome, Duncan.
Hi, nice to be here.
It is wonderful to have you. Loved the book, but before we really dive in, let's let the readers kind of know what they're going to get when they open up the cover. What is your little elevator pitch?
Wow. I guess the elevator pitch is it's a book set in the world of, the workplace, which doesn't sound very exciting, but if you think about things like Succession on HBO, that kind of thing, you can get plenty of drama going on in the world of big business. And really, it's a tightly woven plot, which allows me to explore a number of themes like competition, collaboration, morality, love. So it's really a device, if you like, to let me go around a number of themes and take a look at how people interact with each other and what they can do to each other if they think they can get away with it.
Absolutely. And I like that idea, if they think they can get away with it, because there's a lot of that in this book, right?
There is, right? Yeah.
So this is kind of genred in the suspense thriller category. What pulled you into that genre?
I'm not sure. I started the book with the intent of writing into a particular genre. I wanted to write something that engaged the reader, and I guess if you felt it was in the sort of suspense thriller genre, maybe that's what helps to engage readers, right? I mean, I read a good thriller like everybody else and enjoy them. Right. So I tried to keep the plot, fast paced and not too lengthy, and keep the reader guessing about what might come next, because that's what entertains me when I read, and hopefully that'll entertain others.
I like how you say that you didn't write to a genre. I'm the same way. I have a story in my head and I write it, and then it's like, okay, now it's time for marketing. What are we going to call this?
Right. And, I learned so much, not just during the writing of this book, but then also through the publishing of this book. And also, one of the things I learned about genres is that, for real high-level commercial success, you need to be really careful about writing to a particular genre, whether that is thriller or suspense or, romantasy or cozy murder or whatever it is.
Right.
Publishers like to know that it's right in the middle of this genre and it's exactly like this author or that author, because then they can understand where to pitch. But that's not really why I write the book. I write the book for me, and I guess it spans a number of genres as a result.
Yeah. I've noticed a lot of indie authors that I talk to do have what I call the cross genre. There's a little romance and there's a little this, there's a little, and it kind of crosses a lot. I personally prefer those to one that follows, that is a little more formulaic, that these certain things will have to happen because it is a romance, or these certain things. I kind of like it where I kind of know what's going to happen because books are books, and you have kind of a flow, but not necessarily, well, this is what's going to happen next, because it always happens in a romance. Right.
Yeah, so, but each to their own, right? I mean,
right. Oh, yeah. And I think
there are plenty of people out there who love a specific genre, and they'll go for that every day of the week. And if that's what they particularly prefer, then great. And there's plenty of material to satisfy that need. But equally, like you, I wanted to write something that would appeal to me if I was picking up for the first time. And I hope that other people that do the same, enjoy it for that reason.
Well, I definitely did. So you caught at least one. So that's good.
Right.
What prompted this story? Like, was there this one event that happened and bam, the idea came to you?
No, is the quick answer. So like many other people, I found myself with more spare time than I wanted in the pandemic. I remember I'd wanted to start writing a novel length piece of fiction for a while, but lots of other things get in the way, in terms of life. You've got family and work as it was at the time, and so on, and not being able to get out and go and see people during the pandemic. There were a lot of people who started books in that period, and I'd sort of thought about what I would write about, but really, I literally sat down and I wrote the first sentence, which got tweaked a few times for sure, but I wrote the first sentence, then the second sentence, then the third sentence. And before I knew it, I'd written a chapter. And then before I knew it, I'd written 2 chapters. And I'd spun up, a dozen plot lines without really thinking about how on earth I was going to manage these through the course of a book and then tie them all together at the end. It took me another 3 years to figure that out, because the world went back, and we got to go and travel again and go to the office again and that kind of stuff. So my writing slowed down quite considerably. But then in sort of 2022, I managed to get some more time to work on the novel and finish it off. So there was no real planning, and I believe there are a couple of types of authors. There's the plotters who will plan the book out to begin with and then write the chapters, and that sounds amazing to me. But I really wanted to get to know my characters and play with the plot lines and write it as I went, which is probably the harder way to do it, but it worked for me.
So I'm a pantser, which is what you're describing, this idea of where it's there and you just start writing it. I've tried plotting. A number of ways, because I tried one, it didn't work for me. And I had a friend say, oh, that one is just so rigid. Here, try this one. I backed myself into corners with this plot, because it's like my creativity just dries up. And I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. It's like, okay, so this plot says that I'm supposed to be doing this kind of thing next, and I don't have that in my head. And I don't know, it just doesn't feel right to me. I think that we all plot.
I think don't you have to get to know, you
plot on the other end.
You have to get to know your characters, I think, because you have to understand how they would react and what they would do next, which means that I find it very difficult to sort of think about, in chapter 65 or whatever it is, what would they do there, because I don't know them yet. However, I have read some really interesting articles from plotters, people that do take this approach, and they spend forever getting to know their characters before they even put a word on the page, and they'll have pages and pages and pages of notes.
I think that really we all do both plotting and pantsing. They do their pantsing while they're getting to know their character and they're doing all of that, but it doesn't actually go into the story until later. And you and I do all of the getting to know on paper, and then we have to go back and make sure the plot's okay. We go back later and do, it's like, okay, ooh, that has to move around. I have to add something here. I'm always having to change and add, and ooh, for that to make sense, this will have had to have happened, and that kind of thing. And so I think we all do the same thing. We just come at it from different points of view. So, that's great.
I started another book, and I did think about, should I try this plotting approach? And I sort of started it, but like you, I sort of didn't find an affinity with it very quickly, and went back fairly quickly to
my characters kind of refuse to play. Like, I say, okay, so we're going to do this thing next, and they're like, I'd never do that. No. I'm not totally interested in this. You let me know when you're done playing your little game here, and then we'll get back to telling you our story. I don't know. It just doesn't work for me to try to do it ahead of time. I think that my creative part is so much better than that logical brain that's trying to create an outline, that it's just better to let the creative out and play, and then fix the mistakes later. It's just easier for me. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about all of these different plot lines. I mean, you've got board meetings, you've got black tie affairs, you've got a triathlon, you've got human trafficking, you've got love interests, it's crazy full of stuff. And I love it. I wonder, how do you keep all of those lines moving along so that they have a conclusion, and keep everything straight without it getting too much? I've read books before where there's so many things going on that as a reader, I can't keep up with what's happening. How do you make sure that you don't bring in too many plot lines and then keep everything where you know that you're wrapping it up in the end? It seems, I mean, to me, it would seem difficult with all that you had going on in this book.
Yeah, I think to be authentic to the subject matter, there had to be a lot going on, right? So the people like Winter and Julian, who run these two enormous companies, they are crazy busy people, and they have 100 competing demands on their time every day. So so it felt, as I say, authentic to me to have that much going on in their lives for them to contend with. Always had the opportunity to find more. So there's some things that come in left and right field midway through the book, which are pretty dramatic. But day to day, I mean, they do a lot of things. In terms of how I try to sort of keep the A, the plots moving forward appropriately, but B, help the reader not get lost in the middle of all these complex things going on. It's classic sort of storytelling technique. There's quite a lot of foreshadowing going on, so I'm pointing to things that are going to come to sort of plant those seeds. And then there are a couple of devices, like in one particular scene, Winter gets up in the morning and she runs a mental checklist in her head of all the things she has to do that day, and that's what she would do in real life, but it also helps the reader keep track of what's going on
to do that day, right?
In her world, right? And then during their dialogue with people they're interacting with, again, you can recap things, and you can go back and reinforce elements of those individual character arcs and plot lines, which helps the reader again sort of cement those, I guess, in their understanding of the story. I say that sort of seems to come fairly naturally. What was harder was having built these plot lines to begin with, and knowing what the big scenes of the book were going to be, how I could weave those through those scenes and come to some sort of satisfying conclusion.
Right. Yeah. I've done that. And I think partially because we're pantsers, right? I don't always know where the conclusion's going to be yet. And I've gotten pretty far into a book and thought, oh, I hope the end comes to me soon. We're nearing the end of where I should be, stopping, and I still don't know how to finish this book. Yeah. So that's the scary part of being a pantser, is sometimes you can get really deep into the book before you have that aha, oh, this is how it's going to wrap up. But that can get a little scary. How far were you into the book when you finally said, okay, I know how all of these little plot lines are coming together and how we're going to
end? Not too far, probably about a third of the way in. I kind of knew how the resolution would happen. But that doesn't mean to say that I knew what would happen in each scene. I knew, for example, that there had to be some investigative work going on in the back end of the book to link a couple of things together. And I had no idea how that would work. It was only when I got to that chapter that, based on what I've written so far,
it was like, I know what I could do. Yeah.
Well, I came up with some ideas that would seem plausible, for sure. And there's also a character, Sunita Malik, who's a journalist in the book. And up front, I sort of shroud her a bit in mystery, and then decided I want to give a bit more of her backstory towards the end. So I found a device that I could offer, which would again give her a reason to explain why she behaves the way she does, and why she thinks what she does. And I hope that's interesting, and kind of gives believability to these characters, but also makes you want to root for them in some extent.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you brought up your female protagonist. Her name was Winter McGlynn. I'm curious, is she totally made up? Is she someone that you know? Is she a conglomerate of people? Where did she come from?
So totally made up. I mean, all my characters are totally made up, but I borrowed ruthlessly from character traits of people I've met along the way. She is, just like Julian, she is a mix of people that I've come across or worked with or met socially, and I hope she's typical of people in that kind of role. She's incredibly driven, incredibly motivated, works very hard, but nor is she perfect. And I wanted to have that duality in my characters, because in the world of big business, very few people are perfect, because they are highly ambitious to get to the levels they get to. But I think in general, very few people are perfect, and I wanted people to root for her some of the time, but also sort of squint a bit at her a few times as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I won't delve too much into it, but she has periods of self-reflection too, where she begins to wonder, like, am I doing what I'm doing for the right reasons? And I liked her ability to be real that way. And then wonder about herself. Like, am I really the person that I'm saying I am?
Yeah.
Or is there something else motivating me? Or
Yeah,
could it be,
and she
or
does
could
have,
it be both? Could I be motivated by both what I say I am and this other thing that's driving
absolutely
me?
right.
Yeah.
And you know, having worked in business for a long time myself, you know, I think even very senior people at the top of these organizations, they do have moments of self-doubt, and they face imposter syndrome, where it's like, well, here I am doing all these things, but why? Why do people follow me? You know, why should people listen to what I have to say? Why, you know, do I believe that I can get this, you know, next achievement completed? So she does go through that, and so does Julian. You know, his self doubts are quite different in their sort of tone and genre, but nevertheless, they both have, you know, similar thoughts at times.
Right. So Julian Dayton is the male protagonist, and the two of them have a history. Their families have history. They're both heads of big companies that are rivals, which really set up a nice, you know, it was just perfect, right? Because there's this nice reason for all that's going on between them. Which character did you enjoy writing more, Winter or Julian?
Honestly, I'm not sure I had a preference. I mean, they say that authors learn to love their characters, and I very much did. You know, through the course of writing the book, they became incredibly familiar, and you know, they say create characters that you love and then put them in horrible situations, and I did, and that led to hopefully some good reading for people. But I mean, you know, I loved writing Julian just as much as Winter. Interestingly, when I've talked to some readers of the book, you know, I find that you know, many people enjoy both characters, but there's certainly a portion who very much preferred reading about one or the other, and they found it more difficult or more tiresome or whatever to read about the, you know, the sort of obverse character. But you know, again, it's yin and yang, right? It's two characters playing out who kind of fit each other in certain ways because of that history between their families, and that intergenerational angle as well, where, you know, they do talk with their parents and they have got that background and they have got siblings. You know, all those dynamics are playing through, which is, I guess, why I mentioned Succession at the top of the show.
Right, absolutely. So I liked Winter more than I liked Julian. Julian irritated me. I mean, he really. There were several times where it was like, oh my gosh, like, oh. But I never disliked him enough that I wasn't somehow rooting for things to be okay. You know, like I kept going back and forth with him. It was like, man, I don't like him. I want, you know, he seems like, sometimes he seems pretty sleazy. And then you would see an interaction with family. And I would immediately feel my heart go, well, it's no wonder. I mean, it's no wonder.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So there was enough. You did a good job of creating this character that you're not supposed to just absolutely fall in love with, right? But still have enough empathy for, that you don't want to just see him decimated, because you're thinking, you know, I just looked at like so many things with his family over and over and over. You'd see things, and I would think, well, if that happened to me, I don't know what kind of person I'd be.
Right. And that was absolutely what I wanted you to feel. You know, he's not very likable. But as you progress through the book, you learn some of the reasons why he's not very likable, and I hope that gives you empathy, and I hope it makes his behaviour not more tolerable but more understandable. And again, you know, I think that's true to life. We all have baggage, and Julian Winter have plenty of baggage to deal with.
Yes, absolutely.
You know, of different varieties, but that makes them who they are, and do the things that they try and do.
Yeah, Absolutely. When a reader walks away after they've finished reading this book, I know you want them to have said, wow, that's a good story. What else has Duncan written? Let's run right out and get another D.R. Shores book. But other than that, is there something that you want them to take away, something you want them to have thought about beyond the good story?
Yeah. So this was an opportunity for me to weave in these themes that I mentioned earlier, competition, collaboration, morality, love, and to some extent, provoke the reader to think about. We already talked about it, right? Why does Julian behave the way he does? Why does Winter behave the way she does? So there are some fairly big topics in the book. There is mortality. There is the concept of love and how people choose to pursue love in different ways. There is a section around politics, which is quite dear to the United Kingdom, which I won't give away, but I have a particular opinion on an event that happened in the United Kingdom around the political space a few years ago. And I wanted to reflect on both sides of the argument that raged around that for some period of time. So what better place than to put it in a fictional story and have the characters think about what that means. And I hope that provokes people to think about these topics. And in some way, I hope it changes their mind on a few things, because when I read a book, I read it for the story, but I'm also really interested in connecting with the author at the back end of that, and what they think and why they wrote what they did in the way they did. So that's just as important to me as actually being satisfied by the story itself. So I hope people do get provoked into a bit more thought around some of these plot lines and change as a result.
Absolutely. I think that fiction has that ability to transport the reader to be someone that they couldn't be or wouldn't choose to be, go places that they haven't been, do things that are different from their everyday life, and then explore things in a way it's easier to explore than to explore one-on-one. For instance, a lot of my books touch on things like racism and xenophobia, and those are like taboo topics, right? And so you try to have a conversation with a group of people, and it can get tense very quickly, and you're afraid to really say what your opinions are, and everybody gets, because now everybody's digging in. But if you read it in a book and your characters are exploring it, you're exploring it in your mind, and there isn't anyone yelling anything at you, right? Yeah. And you get the opportunity to see two sides, maybe three, maybe four sides of this issue, and maybe it will cause you to think. And I think that's a wonderful thing that fiction has that ability to do, is allow you private time to explore things in ways that you might not be able to do any other way.
Yeah, totally. And also, you can see this in lots of other books. I'm currently reading Zadie Smith's White Teeth, which was her debut back in 2000. And it explores, multiracial Britain in the 80s, right? And all of the racism that was in and around Britain at that time. And she wrote it from a very personal perspective, right? Because she was, part of that conversation. I mean, she was born in 75, I think. So she would have been in childhood in the mid 80s. But I guess these are what kind of talked to her and fed her imagination. Right. Ultimately leading her to write such a novel. But whether it's topics like racism, or you could say, Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged and gave rise to objectivism, which was her philosophy on life. All these authors, put forward. Salman Rushdie famously, of course, with the Satanic Verses. They're putting forward points of view that they hope that the reader will engage with and think differently as a result, having read that.
Right. Walk away with at least a little more perspective, right?
Yeah, and I think that, as you say, that's the power of fiction. It's and possibly more than non-fiction books. I mean, non-fiction books clearly are very factual, but they tell you what has happened, whereas fiction can tell you what might happen, and I think that's quite different.
And I think it can allow you to try on these personas and see, does it fit me? Like when I'm reading Julian, I'm Julian for the moment.
Yes.
And like, how does that feel? What does that feel like? And that's
Yeah.
why you can have empathy, right? Because the only way you can have empathy is if you can kind of feel what he must be experiencing, and those kinds of things. And I just think that has to be good for a person to be able to step in these other shoes and try out things that they might not see. And then it can change your perspective, even just minutely. But if you read 50 books a year, that's 50 times where you minutely changed a little bit about yourself. And if you do that year after year after year, then you begin to be shaped by these other perspectives. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, reading, I guess, is like travel in that regard. It always broadens the mind.
It does.
And also, fiction is different. Book fiction is different as a medium to film fiction. So in films, rarely do you get the opportunity to understand what's going on internally in the character. I mean, yeah, you get the great actors that can convey what they're feeling through their portrayal. But in book fiction, you can go deep. You can not just go into the character's mind and understand, as you say, what they're thinking right then, but you can also flash back, flash forward. You can really play with those emotions and, to your point, illuminate why that character is doing what they're doing or behaving the way they're behaving. In a much more detailed way. I'm not sure I could ever be an actor, but I loved writing the book because that gave me that scope to go and explore those things.
Absolutely. So, Duncan, what's next for you? Are you working on anything right now?
Yes, I've started another book, but given Shallow Stock took me more than 4 years to finish, it won't be on the shelves anytime soon. I can't see this one being finished any more quickly. But it's not a sequel in any way, shape, or form. But again, it kind of follows these sort of tropes in terms of I'm trying to explore things which are important to me and perhaps important to other people as well. And to do that, you have to find the right setting, you have to find the right characters, you have to put them in the right circumstances through which you can explore those elements. So it's slow because, like we said before, I'm not plotting this; it's all being pantsed. But I'm hopeful that by the end of the process, again, we'll have something that's readable and engaging and holds together in a singular piece of work.
I'm sure it will, because you did just fine with this one. So I enjoyed it so
much. Thank you.
Hey guys, if you want to keep this conversation going, head on over to Novels and Latte Book Club on Facebook, and there you're going to have an opportunity to win a copy of D.R. Shore's book, Shallow Stock. So head on over today and make sure you look for the post. If someone wanted to get in touch with you, Duncan, how do they do it? They want to talk with you about this book. They want to talk with you about one of the characters, about what you're writing. Just, reach out and say, hey, I've talked with an author. How do they do that?
Sure. You're welcome to get in touch with me. I'm on the socials, so you can get me as D_R_Shores on X, on the Threads, on Insta. And also, if you'd like to read some more of the reviews or learn more about the book, you can head over to shallowstock.com and have a look there.
Fantastic. I want to thank you so much for being on the show today. I really enjoyed the book. Run right out and buy it, guys. It's fantastic. And I can't wait to see what you bring to the world next.
Well, thank you for having me, Terry. It's much appreciated.
Thank you for listening to Online for Authors, where I, Terry M. Brown, author of character-driven fiction and host of the podcast, introduce readers to characters they'd love to invite to lunch. Tune in next Tuesday for another podcast episode.